Welcome to Venable and our program today entitled Thriving Amid Turmoil and Change, What All Nonprofits Can Learn from Nonprofit Turnarounds. My name is Jeff Tenenbaum, Chair of the Nonprofit Organizations Practice here at the Venable Law Firm. And this program is part of the monthly series of programs that we do on a wide array of nonprofit legal topics that we've been doing for the last 4.5 years or so. And we're thrilled about today's program, about the topic, and especially about today's speakers, who I will introduce in a bit. We are joined, we have a great crowd here, a full house here in our DC office joining us here for lunch, and we have a great group of, I think, about 250 folks registered and signed up around the country participating on today's webinar. Today's program, most of the programs that we do, as you know, many of you are regular attendees and participants in our monthly programs, and many of them, if not most of them, focus primarily on legal and related issues. Today's program is certainly one of the ones that focuses the least on legal issues, which is always a good thing. And it's, I think, the first one we've ever done where we have none of the primary speakers being lawyers. Which is also another very good thing. So I'll have to play the part of lawyer today to the best of my abilities. Anyway, we're glad you could join us for today's program. This is an issue, a topic that I have had a lot of experience with from the legal perspective and related perspectives in counseling many nonprofit organization clients over the years who have gone through their own turmoil, gone through significant change. I've witnessed some terrific nonprofit executives help to orchestrate and lead and carry out those changes. Two of those are with us here today, one of whom I have the privilege of working with as a client, Laura Lott for the American Alliance of Museums. And it always is very incredibly impressive to me to see how nonprofits and the leaders of those organizations have pulled their organizations through some incredible turmoil and challenges and dealing with very difficult and trackable problems and orchestrating successful changes. There's so much that I've always thought can be learned from those experiences that can help every nonprofit, whether you're facing some major challenges or just minor ones. Lessons that you can take away from those successes, and also the pitfalls and failures that others have been through as well, to help inform and educate you in the running of your own nonprofit organizations or those that you might be advising. And that's really the purpose and function of today's program. Hopefully we'll be able to do that for you. Before we get into the heart of it, a few housekeeping matters. First, for those of you in the trade and professional association community, these programs are eligible for CAE continuing education credit. A preview of our next two upcoming programs. On November 17th, next month, our program is entitled Proposed Changes to the, I don't know why we have this. Proposed changes to the FLSA's white-collar exemption criteria, what nonprofits need to know about the current rules, where things are heading, and how to avoid employee classification traps and pitfalls. This has always been a very hot area, a very difficult and challenging area, but with the U.S. Department of Labor's proposed changes to the Fair Labor Standards Act, particularly the proposed change to the salary test in order to be eligible to be an exempt employee. This is bringing even more focus to this really important critical area, and we have two of my colleagues who are going to be leading that program. It's a really important program I encourage you to participate in. And then on December 10th, another issue that is seemingly always in the news, but also always in the news, it seems, as it relates to nonprofit organizations, data security. Our program on December 10th is entitled A Breach Can Happen to You or Already Has and You Just Don't Know It, How Nonprofits Can Best Manage Cybersecurity Risk. Again, two of our colleagues who are real experts in this area will be leading that program. Today, for those of you in the room, feel free to ask questions throughout the program. I just ask you to raise your hand, and I'll call upon you. And wait, please, for the microphone. Someone will bring the microphone to you to ask the questions so those on the webinar can hear the questions. Those of you on the webinar, please pose your questions to me using the chat feature on the webinar software, and I'll pose those to our speakers at the appropriate times. Those of you in the room have a handout book that has a printed copy of the PowerPoint slides along with full bios of our speakers and a number of related handout materials, articles, some really interesting ones, including a case study that the American Alliance of Museums prepared about their particular transition and the change that was orchestrated there. It's been widely reported on in the association and nonprofit media, a real incredible success story, and that case study along with other articles are definitely worth reading. Those of you on the webinar did receive a link to the PowerPoint slides as part of the confirmation email you received this morning, and all of you will receive an email tomorrow that contains all of these materials electronically, along with a link to the recording of today's event. Those recordings, as many of you know, are all posted on our nonprofit YouTube channel, and feel free to forward that email tomorrow to others who may benefit from the program. Now, let's talk about our speakers for a minute. Our first speaker to my immediate right, Laura Lott, is President and CEO of the American Alliance of Museums. She took over that position in June of this year. Prior to that, she served as the Alliance's Chief Operating Officer since 2010. Laura led the 2012 relaunch of the Alliance, including rebranding the organization and rebuilding its technical infrastructure and web and mobile presence, and redesigning its membership and excellence programs, leading to a 60% growth in membership in the organization's first three profitable years in a decade. Prior to her work at the Alliance, Laura guided the evolution and growth of several nonprofit education organizations. Most recently, she served as CFO and COO of the Jason Project, an international nonprofit education program at the National Geographic Society. To my far right is Pat Nichols. Pat is President of Transition Leadership International. He focuses his practice in two primary areas. First, serving as a transitional CEO of organizations facing major strategic transitions, and consulting with organizations facing similar transitions. Pat led the startup of the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, a nonprofit created by the Obamacare Act of 2010. He's led major transitions for a 17-nation health-related charity, a U.S. national and local youth organization, an alternative energy organization, and many others. These organizations have faced transitions varying from financial turnarounds to reversing a 20-year membership decline, to identifying and managing a merger, to restoring comity amongst a warring membership and board. Pat has had some enormous success with some very high-profile brand-name nonprofits that you would all recognize and know about. He's got a great reputation in the field as being a real kind of turnaround doctor that comes into many nonprofits and helps to effectuate some much-needed change, and he's going to share a lot of that wisdom and experience and war stories with you today. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Laura to get us started. Laura?
Thanks, Jeff. I do have the dubious distinction here today of having been through a couple of turnaround situations. The first one actually, which was quite a turmoil, a nonprofit organization that had essentially become bankrupt by the time that I arrived there, and we did turn it around. But the focus of today, really going to talk about the American Alliance of Museums. Reinvention is really what we have called it. And as Jeff said, the case study is in the book that you have, and was written by a journalist named Scott Kersner, who writes for the Boston Globe. We were fortunate enough to get a grant in order to hire him to do that as a real journalistic piece and as a sort of third-party telling of the story, and we're thrilled with how it came out. I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes telling you a little bit about just to give you some context for who we are. We are a 109-year-old 501c3 nonprofit that focuses on strengthening museums. That's our mission. And we do that through, as our tagline says, championing museums through advocacy and nurturing excellence in museums. We have about 31,000 museum and museum professional members. We have both individual and organizational members. About 27,000 of those are individuals, museum professionals, from directors to fundraisers to registrars, curators, all aspects of things that I used to take for granted in terms of running a museum. And about 4,000 actual institutions. And we say A to Z, art museums to zoos, and everything in between. Botanic gardens, children's museums, science centers, a pretty diverse membership. That is mostly in the U.S., although in the last probably 5 or 6 years, we've had a really strong, growing international participation in a lot of our programs. We hold the largest meeting of museum professionals in the world. It's actually going to be here in D.C. in May of 2016, which we're excited about. We do professional development around the world and around the year in a variety of museum topics. We advocate on behalf of the cause of museums. We do an annual Museum Advocacy Day here in DC, and provide a lot of grassroots support for museums at the state and local level to advocate on causes, on issues that will impact their operations, whether it's the charitable tax deduction or funding at the state and local levels. We also accredit museums. And support museums wherever they are in the continuum of excellence, what we call the continuum of excellence. So from recognizing there are actually standards and best practices for the great operation of a museum, and museums have the opportunity to pledge their knowledge and support of those, and then work their way up to being actually accredited. And about 25% of our members are accredited. We publish both books and bi-monthly magazine. And we have a couple of different government grant programs that we manage, including a $1 million grant from the Department of State that is really all about connecting museums and their communities in the U.S. with museums and their communities abroad in areas where the U.S. is working toward further diplomacy. And it's an area called cultural diplomacy that the State Department is interested in. And last but not least, one of the most exciting things I think that AAM does is we house the Center for the Future of Museums, which monitors cultural and political and economic trends that are happening in the world and helps museums identify the opportunities and challenges that arise because of those trends. But our turnaround story sort of begins in 2009 with a strategic planning process that the organization went through as a result of hiring a new president and really having a decade or so of declining financial, even pre-recession, declining financial situation. And a real realization among the board of directors, which is primarily museum directors at that time, that the organization really needed a pretty big reinvention and really needed to focus on strengthening itself before it could really strengthen the museum field. And so the strategic plan really guided a series of changes at the organization that would ultimately lead to the 2012, 3 years later, what we call the reinvention of AAM, which really was from technology from the ground up, a new association management system, a new website, and just new focus on new media. A reinvention and streamlining of our accreditation program, which was 40 years old at the time and had grown into a pile-on of a lot of things over 40 years and just needed a streamlining and an updating. And a reinvention, probably most significantly, of our membership program, which led, as Jeff said, to a 60% growth in our membership. And I'll talk a little bit about that. It was all marked with a rebranding. So we didn't just rebrand the organization to change the name or the logo, but we were going through all of these other changes and decided it was an opportune time to mark all of those significant changes in our organization with a simultaneous change in our look and feel. And we like to say we changed our middle name and became the American Alliance of Museums. We used to be the American Association of Museums. And that really, did signify change. It also lead us to instill in our next strategic planning process, which is ongoing right now, really consider how we are more of an alliance with our members, with other organizations that have like-minded interest in the importance of museums, and with the public even. So it has been significant. In reflecting on what we have gone through at AAM, I pulled out sort of 7 keys to success that I wanted to focus on today. And the first thing that we did is really dig into a lot of data. And this was right after the strategic plan was launched. We didn't have any idea where exactly we were going, but we know we needed to surface and report on and analyze a lot of data about what had been happening at the organization. And we shared it with the staff, with the board. We shared it pretty broadly, pretty openly, without necessarily any strong conclusions, but just sort of in this process of investigating ourselves. We spent several years doing that, and so by the time it came to a vote of the board for some pretty significant and risky changes, it was pretty smooth. And I have often wondered why, because people ask, what did your board sort of say? Weren't they, sort of crazy about some of the changes you were making? And they weren't, because I think they had seen all of this data for so long and really understood it and realized that the changes that we were proposing were just inevitable, and it needed to happen. So for example, I am a CPA by trade actually, and so I have a financial background, but most of my board members do not, especially in the museum field. And so I have always focused on a picture is worth 1,000 numbers, right, in reporting our financials. So I have tons of these kinds of slides just showing the stark reality of our situation, not all financial, but we were losing money. This is a cumulative slide of the $4 million that we had lost in the couple of years leading up to our change. Flat line charts rarely make for exciting charts, but they certainly do make the point about the stagnation that was happening in our organization. In fact, it's hard to see, but we actually had a 3% decline in our membership over 5 or 6 years, over a long period of time. Again, pre-recession, so this wasn't all blamed on the recession. And then some sort of optimistic charts too, in showing that while we represented a fairly small percentage of the field, that's the blue line, we had huge opportunity in that green space of people and institutions that we weren't yet reaching. And so this chart actually became a lot of what the case study refers to as the earthquake moment, where our thinking changed about, we need to move that blue line up. We need to represent more of the field, and how do we, what do we really have to do in order to make that happen? And we invested in a local researcher to do some surveying and some real investigation among our membership and our lapsed membership and our never been members, never thought about the organization before. The 700 responses we got were pretty darn consistent. We were too expensive, and the museum field in particular was really slow to recover from the recession, so I'm sure a lot of that played into that. In fact, many of them are still recovering, struggling. There was a lot of confusion about our value proposition. So again, after 109 years and a lot of adding on and building, I think what we really stood for and what you really came to AAM for became pretty confused, among the staff, and never mind among the potential membership. And we often lost out to competition. There are 46 staffed museum service organizations in the country at the regional level, at the state level, at the discipline-specific level. And so we compete with them to a certain extent, and many of them were less expensive and offering better, more relevant, I guess, benefits to the members is what we heard. Operationally, this is what our website used to look like, which is no wonder everyone is very confused. We had outdated technology across the organization. Our staff was largely focused on manual processes, and we spend all of our time fixing problems or things we didn't quite get right the first time instead of innovating and thinking about the future. And culturally, I would say the culture was pretty broken too, especially after the tough things that many nonprofits and associations had to do in the months and years following the recession in terms of furloughs and cutting back on 403B matching contributions and those kinds of things. So the morale was low. There was lots of silos in a 45-person, actually it was closer to 60-person probably at that point, operation, and lots of fighting, sort of infighting over resources, sort of out of disparity, and a lot of fear, because a lot of those charts that I showed you that showed what was happening, they hadn't seen before. The board hadn't seen them, the staff hadn't seen them. There was just a lot of fear about, but they knew something was wrong, right? So there was just a lot of fear and lack of understanding about what was going on. So that's sort of the situation in 2010, say. So I wanted to move to sort of another key to success in starting to turn this around, and it was to articulate a really clear vision. So there's a lot of talk and good talk about, rightfully so, about SMART goals, and we had lots of those and still do have lots of specific and measurable and so on goals that we were monitor. But people really like to rally around a pretty lofty, big, simple, sort of simple to articulate vision. And so that's what we needed, and ours became to unite the field, to unite these 35,000 museums in the country, no matter where they were or what size they were or what discipline they represented. That the reason that AAM, the core of our existence, the reason that we were founded, was to bring them all together. And we'd lost, I think, sight of that over our 109 years. And so Pat and I were marveling about, sometimes, you talk about out-of-the-box thinking and, really creative, innovative thinking. In our core, and I think the key to our success was going right back dead center in the box of, uniting the field and really focusing on that. And it drove all of the other changes that we ended up making at the organization.
Laura, may I jump in with a quick question? The vision that you articulated, was that a vision for the change exercise, or was that the formal vision of the organization?
Yeah, it became the vision for the change exercise primarily. Yeah, I mean, it still is a big part of what AAM wants to do, needs to do. I don't think it was articulated before this change exercise, and I think our vision is now broader than this, but certainly for the turnaround, we needed this focus to unify the field. With all that, feedback that we had heard about why, we were splintering. So to actually sort of activate this, while we were working on trying to clarify that vision and be able to articulate it, we were also just working on changing the workplace culture, the culture of the organization. I say workplace culture. It's actually a board culture as well. So it was from top to bottom in the organization. And so identifying really being deliberate in identifying some change agents, both to bring them onto the board and change agents within the staff and new hires that we were bringing into the staff, that we were placing specifically to sort of lead and champion change within the organization and bring some different kinds of thinking and some of the, qualities that you look for in a change agent, a little bit of nimbleness, a little bit of craziness, creativity. So we really were deliberate, and I can name those people today, in identifying, who they were and why we needed them. Eventually, when we had our plan for what we were going to be implementing in the fall of 2012, we had a team, an implementation team that was named, and it was from brand new staff that had just been hired to people that had been at the organization for 20 years, and at all levels. So it was VPs and program coordinators on this team. And they were coached specifically as sort of a change agent team. We read management articles about change management. We read, we had lots of conversations not only about the specifics of the programs that we were going to be changing and implementing and how we were going to communicate them and all of that, but just how that part of that group's goal of, that group was about 10 people, I think. So about a quarter of our, 15% of our organization. Really, they were coached as change agents and talked about how we're going to lead the rest of the organization along during a pretty radical change, during a time when all those other things that I was talking about in terms of the organization culture and morale were happening. And they even participated in something that we like to call liquid team building at the pub that was down the street from our office. Really important part. What we ended up doing was, as I mentioned before, making changes across the organization. But the biggest piece was really changing our membership structure. So we put $1 million on the line in potential lost revenue. Some of it real, lost revenue, to create this tiered structure for members that eliminated, in order to unify the field, we felt we needed to eliminate as much of the financial barrier of becoming part of the field, becoming part of this organization as we possibly could. And so we created this tiered structure, which has been written about quite a bit at ASAE among AAM and other organizations that have started to move to this model, where the first tier, entry level, if you will, in the organization was pay what you can, which is a concept borrowed from the museum field, many of whom have, pay what you can evenings or weekends or weeks, or even that's the way they work all the time. And so it really spoke to the field. And part of what we didn't know at the time but realized since is because it spoke to the field, they interpreted it as pay as much as you can, which is great. So we eliminated the cost barrier. We restructured just what we were offering and clarified a lot about, what we wanted, how we wanted people to engage with us, and what they would get out of being part of the organization. And overall, we reduced dues significantly. So our largest members used to pay $15,000 a year, and now they pay $5,000 a year. And so a pretty significant just decrease, which is obviously part of the reason that we grew. People told us we were crazy to do this, by the way, in the association world especially, that we needed to raise dues in order to survive. There was conversations on the board about wanting sort of revenue guarantees. What are we absolutely going to have in the first year of this? And a little bit, we made tons and tons of projections, but a lot of it was really a leap of faith and a notion that the biggest risk for the organization was not making any change at all. And so, and again, after years of looking at all of this data and searching around for an easy answer, it was a lot easier than you would have expected to have the board go ahead and vote that we were going to put 10 to 20% of our budget on the line, put our money where our mouth was in terms of the importance of uniting the field. And we did have, we had invested in technology at the same time, and had access to real-time data so that we could monitor what was happening, who was joining, what levels they were joining at, who was dropping, why they were dropping, in terms of their participation. And the sort of scary truth is that we didn't have a backup plan for if we started to see those things happening, but we knew we would know, and we would be able to then sort of put in some B plans. Thankfully, we didn't have to. I mentioned we invested $1 million in technology while we were making lots of budget cuts. But the board, I was fortunate enough to have a board at the time who really believed in we needed to spend our way out of this deficit, and we needed to sort of invest in our future. And so we got rid of a lot of those manual processes, and actually have been able to handle double the number of members without adding, in fact, while reducing staff. By and large, because we reduced a lot of our manual processes and invested in the technology. So I think that's really key. And we clarified how we wanted people to engage: join, donate, advocate, and contribute. That's simply how our audience is. As the launch got closer, and as we started to sort of figure out that we wanted to launch this new membership paradigm, we started building allies outside of the organization. And so they started with lunches that my former boss and I, or president at the time, and I would have with people who had been in the field for a while, who kind of knew AAM and were friendly and would give us honest advice. And we'd start with, we have this crazy idea, and we'd kind of walk through it. And over time, it was probably 6 months or so, we got a lot of feedback, and it helped shape our final communication, not only our final communications strategy, because we were anticipating what people were worried about or asking about or confused about, but also helped build what we actually did, because they had great ideas. And it built, probably most importantly, it built our confidence, because people started going, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so we got more and more courageous in having those meetings, leading up to some sneak previews that we did in the weeks before the launch. And one of the smartest things I think we did in hindsight was to identify a group of people, and we all have them, who we called frenemies. So there were people out in the field who would, who were the first to jump on anything that we did, and sort of, be skeptical or be critical about it. And we invited them and lots of other people to see these sneak previews and to give us some feedback in the weeks before, we launched. Those people became our strongest advocates when we finally did launch, because they had had this opportunity. And so on the listservs and out in the blogosphere, when people were sort of saying they hated the new logo, or they didn't understand why we were changing what we were changing, these are the people that came to our rescue so that we didn't have to, and we're more credible probably because they weren't part of the organization. So it's really a key lesson learned. Finally, the last two sort of lessons learned I wanted to touch upon was to communicate continuously. And we hear about this, and we knew this going in. We still didn't communicate enough. We were still explaining, and I had no idea this was going to happen. A year after we had changed our brand and our new logo, we realized our renewals were down. And so we started getting on the phone and calling people, and they had not realized that we changed our name, even though there had been massive amounts of communication in my mind. We thought we had told everyone 100 million times. We were bored with the change at this point, and people still didn't make the connection. We didn't communicate enough about our change in name and brand and sort of just the change in the organization. We're still 3 years out, sort of, having to explain it to a lot of people who are members, who are, part of us, never mind folks outside of our community. So, and then internally, communicating, again and again with the board and with the staff has been a really, I think, key part of helping everyone to kind of come along, and to be persistent. I'm still selling this to a certain extent, right? I'm still showing these charts of reversing trends. We're still benchmarking against the rest of the association world and showing where we are to show how big of a deal it is that we've had this massive increase in membership. And we're showing before and after charts, how much more of the field, like a thermometer, we're sort of representing. And then, of course, the best way to make a board happy is to show financial success. So we're constantly sort of adding to our cumulative operating gains. But it's never done because we are, as I said, I took over as president and CEO of the organization in June, and we're going through our next strategic planning process. And we're, this turnaround was key for saving the organization, frankly, when it had about 5 years left. It had 5 years of operating reserve left. So this is the year we would have gone out of business had we not made the changes that we made, and we're continuing on the same track. But it's not the future. It's still not the future. There are still more big changes, I think, that need to happen at AAM, and so I'm hoping to be back here in another 5 years with the next sort of, hopefully, thriving change.
You got a deal.
Turn it over to Pat.
Yeah, so that is it's a terrific story, and that's our primary case study. Get it? Yeah. It's a terrific story, and that'll be our primary case study. I'm going to take a little different approach to my points, but I have a quick question of Laura that occurred to me this time that it hadn't before. You mentioned having set up the progressions or the projections, which were significantly blue sky, right? You're just kind of trying to figure out what was plausible and put it on paper. Did you also have performance goals for yourselves, when the financial turnaround would come and how great it would be and at what pace you expected the membership to grow and so on?
We did, yeah. We were monitoring numbers, dollars, and even what tiers members would join at and how diverse they would be. So we had a percentage target of how many more zoos and aquariums we wanted to add to the membership. So lots of different targets. Totally blue sky. I mean, we had never done this before. We couldn't find any other real good examples to model our projections off of. So they were just sort of our best guesses, and they ended up being pretty darn close in a lot of places.
Yeah, that's terrific.
The biggest question was how long things would take.
Yeah. So one of the things that every time I've been involved in an exercise like that, in which you're trying to set goals and projections without solid prior evidence to pattern yourself on, you really struggle with the people who say, this is just a waste of time, we're just making this up. But it's like what we learned years ago about strategic planning. The intellectual rigor of this, it causes you to collect data differently, it causes you to process what your experience is differently. So even if you're off by orders of magnitude, you'll learn much faster if you make yourself go through that exercise up front and then can process what you learn against that context.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It was so clear what we were targeting. So whether we met the goals or not, we knew exactly what we were looking for in the data.
Yeah, and it's highly unlikely that you came as close as you did by chance. There was obviously some good thinking in the analysis you did. So what I will do here is, let me grab the clicker. What I intend to do is to take the 7 points that Laura made and put them into a kind of 3-theme context, and then I'll add my own thoughts to that context. I think Laura's observations are terrific. I may elaborate on them a little bit, but I don't have anything to argue with. So what I'll try to do is to offer 3 themes, and then we'll talk about these points and some others beneath those 3 themes. Also, Jeff made the point that that neither of us is a lawyer. But I would warn you that my colleagues tell me that the one thing I have in common with lawyers is my attachment to brevity or lack thereof. So it's very much in your interest to interrupt, right? So if you have questions along the way, please feel free to raise your hand. We'll get the microphone to you, and we'll stop and talk about them in the moment, okay?
Yeah, and also feel free to interrupt not only with questions, but if you have examples of successes or challenges or failures that you have experienced in your own nonprofit organizations that you think would be illustrative to some of the points that Pat's making, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, or if you have contrary experiences, that can be the most interesting conversation, right? When you say, well, I didn't, I went through one of these and I didn't see it that way. So the themes are up there now and lagging close to me here. Actually,
hold on, Pat, I have one question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
I do have one question, Laura. Were the membership dues your only revenue source? And if not, what else? And what did they represent on a percentage basis?
Yeah, our dues were about a third of our revenue, of our $10 million budget. And the other sources were quite diversified. We had grants and contracts. We have an annual meeting, expo hall, and advertising, and those kinds of revenues. So it's sort of a traditional association. But the rise and fall of the number of members had an effect on all of those revenue lines. So we weren't just looking at a decline in dues revenue with the membership decline. It was a decline in people who are coming to the meeting, paying for our professional development, buying books, just about everything else.
Terrific. Okay, so the three themes that I'm going to try to flesh out a little here are create clarity, remember that this is about people, and create momentum and insist upon results. So in thinking about what turnarounds can tell us about operating in a volatile business environment, which we all face today, those three themes, it seems to me, are really crucial. Create clarity, remember it's about people, and create momentum, insist upon results. So point number one there is that, got it, terrific, okay. Start with mission and values. For those of you who were on the webinar, I had a little trouble with the technology. Start with mission and values. And my approach to this kind of thing is to get really clear with people about why they're there in the first place, whether it's members or the people you serve or the people on staff or the board members. And there's an inclination to kind of do the John Kennedy or Winston Churchill thing and preach to people about what's really important to them. Far more effective in my experience to get them talking to you about, why did they come in the first place? This has been a tumultuous place. Why have you stayed? And get people to express to you the values that connect them to the organization, the mission values, of course, and then the other ones. This has always been a nurturing place, or this is a place where you get lots of autonomy. But let them tell you what it is that connects them to the organization. Then, in my approach, articulate a clear vision out of that. And if the vision is not immediately accessible, if you can't immediately say, here's where we're trying to go, and by the way, exactly as Laura suggested, I think these need to be succinct, simple, like unite the field, right? Like unite the field. But sometimes even that is not immediately clear. And if it's not, the only available substitute is a clear progression through which you will get to that point, the steps you'll take, and then the points at which people can engage in the process, to let them know that they're a part of the process, that there are opportunities to participate. So you get to the vision of your change exercise by first, if it's not immediately apparent what that needs to be, by leading people through a process that they understand. The third point Laura made about embrace the data, I couldn't agree with more. Maybe I'll just add an illustration about the importance of controlling the data, of knowing that the data is good and knowing how to get to it. And that's from my own painful experience. Some years ago, I was heading an organization that ran Head Start programs. And I don't know whether anybody's had an experience with a Head Start program. Has anyone been around Head Start? Yeah, absolutely amazing amount of data, absurd amount of data you have to collect, some of it outrageously arcane. And it took me a year to figure out that my inability to figure out which data was most important and to get it unfiltered kept me from realizing where the performance difficulties were. I could have figured out, and we could have figured out in 90 days, the team and I, what it took us a year to figure out if we had been clearer about what data was most important and how we got it at the beginning of the process. So there's a brief lag on the screen up here, which prompts the pauses.
Pat, we have a question.
Hi. Hey.
Oh, sorry.
Right over here. So when you're speaking about start with mission and values, and you asked the questions, why have you stayed, what connects you to the organization, how do you balance that line of questioning, which could be interpreted pessimistically, with new staff and veteran staff? So like some staff might be there for a couple of days and don't realize that they have joined a tumultuous organization. So how do you balance that line of questioning with the diversity of staff and not creating a negative atmosphere for somebody who may not realize that there's turmoil?
Well, my own attitude, it's a great question. My own attitude toward that is to be really transparent about the magnitude of the challenges, because my experience is that bright people will figure it out pretty quickly anyway, and it can either come in one big blow or it can come as drip torture. So the right thing to do, both practically and ethically, I think, is to say we've got serious problems. Now, what you want to do, obviously, is express that with optimism, a sense that there is a way out at the other end. And again, that's where, for instance, a process comes in. So if you can't say, here's how we're going to get out of this, you can say, here's the process by which we're going to get out of this. And by the way, we got a lot of really bright, talented people around here who are committed to this mission, and together we're going to figure out what the solution is. So you give them hope, but you don't gloss over the challenges. That get you what you need? Terrific.
Pat, let me just, if you don't mind, I'll add to that too. Being transparent, and if you can't say, here's how we're going to get out of it, my line was, we have 5 years to get out of it. We're going to figure it out. We've caught it early. We know what's going on. We're going to figure it out. But when we were hiring during the really tumultuous time, I was sort of painfully honest with people about where we were and what we knew and what we didn't know, and almost took an approach of trying to test their fears, try to scare them away from the position, and find the people that were really into it, like that were energized and excited because they're out there, these people that want to be part of a change and maybe more excited about that than coming into a really stable environment. And I found a couple of them, and they've been key. So.
Pat and Laura, we see this a lot in our clients, this kind of culture of transparency with your staff, also with your board, and even with kind of the broader constituency, donor supporters, sponsors, members that you might represent. I see it all the time. Some nonprofits have a real culture of transparency, and some have the exact opposite. And I've seen those with the exact opposite of transparency really cause tremendous damage and harm to staff morale, to retaining good staff, to board staff relations, to so many other things. And then I have a handful of clients in mind where new leadership, staff leadership, CEO, and other staff came in and really changed that whole culture, and it's had a dramatic positive impact in all of those situations. And I don't think this applies just with respect to big changes in turmoil, but with respect to everything. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, I think it's just harder to do in these periods because you're concerned that you're close to the edge anyway, and you're afraid that something you do will push you off the edge. But I think the transparency is absolutely vital. That actually brings us to the next point, which is remembering that this is about people. Laura made a terrific point about preparing people for change. Some kind of elaborations on that. One of them is, once you're clear about mission and value commitment, really important to frame the change in connection to those, to build the change out of it. To be able to talk about, we're committed to serving children. And in fact, I'll just give you a specific example. I headed an organization that was in the business of injury prevention for children. And we had with major challenges about silos, about how the organization worked inside its silos, and there was a lot of distrust across the silos. So we can't work with those guys because. And so we had to have conversations that were, if you're in development or if you're in communications or if you're even in programs, how many lives are you going to save by yourselves, right? So knocking down these silos is about the number of kids' lives we save. But taking it back to that mission, taking the organizational issue back to the mission issue and obliging people to kind of test their behavior against the mission is a really powerful personal tool. Second, predict discomfort and doubt. This is closely related to the question you asked. It's going to come. So telling people up front it's going to come and telling them how you're going to work through it is far better than letting it hit them like a wave of cold water. Right? And finally, this is back to the process, but be really clear about the junctures of review, the points at which you go back and say, are we getting this right? Like a few months into the process of renewing members, when you've got these junctures where you can say, are we screwing it up? So that you can then you can make the adjustments and people know that they can commit themselves and that there will be an adjustment point, a point at which they can bring their data to the table and reconsider. Laura's next point was identify change agents. The obvious subpoint here is, am I in the right place? Yeah, I'm a slide ahead, sorry. Identify change agents. Give them autonomy. Obviously, they have to have room to work. If clear on the vision, then give people room to work inside that vision. Shine a light on their successes. And my favorite technique for doing that is to create very, very quickly some short-term goals that are typically not strategic. They're not the most important things the organization has to do. They'll tend to be more operational, like get our finances cleaned up and get the numbers out on time, like improve this thing about the database so that we can get this information at a certain time. Find those things that have to be done very early. Find those when you realize you've got a change episode. Find those things that have to be done irrespective of where you're going strategically. Draw a line in the sand and say, we're going to have this done by X date. And then put good people or the people you believe to be good people in charge of those episodes. And it gives those efforts. And it gives them a chance to operate with some autonomy. It gives them a chance to be in the limelight. It gives you a chance to create internal heroes, the people, the change agents that others can follow and learn from. John? Microphone for John.
Just wait for the mic for a second.
Thank you. Getting back to the top item, preparing people for change, I wondered if either of you came across any surprises between the time you initiated the process, the midpoint, and the end. Were there any surprises that cropped up that caused you to strategically think differently the way you're going to message and prepare the people for the changes later on in the process?
About talking to the people, Laura?
I'm sure that there were tons of them. There are two things that come to mind immediately. One is this process that we had of sort of starting to unveil some of the changes in smaller groups and in sort of safer environments before we had really nailed everything down was valuable because I think we sort of saw those surprises in smaller chunks before we finalized things. So we kind of built the final vision for what we were changing, what we were going to launch, based upon lots of conversations sort of interim that got wider and wider in scope so that we didn't have the single sort of surprise. We did have, I think a week before we actually pulled the trigger on all of these, mass emails that were going out to people launching the new membership paradigm, announcing the new dues. Because of a technical issue, we launched our website a week earlier. and we launched the website because we felt we were going to have these huge influxes of traffic, and we weren't sure our old technology would be able to handle it, frankly. So we just made the call that we had to launch the new technology early, which gave everybody sort of a sneak preview of the new logo and some of the new messaging. And there was a pretty critical blogger who started, sort of saying, well, what's going on, and why do we know about this, and and it gave the staff real pause. There was a panic in the office among people going, uh-oh, maybe we're doing too much, maybe we didn't get this quite right, and there was that, sort of knee-jerk, I think, without even really thinking too much about it, leadership effort to say, nope, we've thought a lot about this. We're going to toe the line. We're going to, we've prepared, and we're just going to keep moving forward and not let these little kind of hiccups of, terrifying moments prevent us from moving out with this. And, before we were done with that conversation, those mass emails started going out, and we were in.
That's great. The one that popped to my mind, John, wasn't about changing the message, but about more fundamental course change because of how people were responding. And one of my clients, we'd had horrible staff turnover. I mean, we turned over more than 2/3 of the staff in 2 years' time. And, of course, the result was lots of vacancies all the time, and people were working themselves to the bone. And then here comes a guy who says, let's make change. Let's do a lot of things differently, right? Pretty painful to face. And my initial approach was, let's calm down. We've borne the load so far. Let's try to bear it a little farther. Let's, let me get a fix on how we work and where our needs are and so on. And people were so worn out they couldn't listen to that. So we did just the opposite. We said, okay, we're going to go fill 8 jobs over the next, all, kind of manager and above. We're going to fill 8 jobs over the next 12 weeks or something like that. And we brought in search people, and we filled 8 jobs over the next 12 weeks. And then it opened up the conversation about doing things differently. So it was a response to their anxiety. There's one in the back of the room here. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I hear you talking about people, and I wanted to find out from the panelists whether you were able during, especially a consultant, during these processes to talk about people as in a culture and then identify the aspects of the culture that you're trying to achieve. Were you able to align certain characteristics of the culture you're trying to achieve with your new mission, with your new organization, the way it looks, and were you actually able to benchmark or measure or talk about those things in such a way that all stakeholders could identify progress or achievement?
Going to respond first? Do you want me to?
Well, I haven't answered the first part of it, which is, our vision for uniting the field clearly translated into a workplace culture piece of uniting the organization. So I talked about the silos and this competition among different people and departments in the organization, and so we did have specific conversations about how we also needed to be more unified as an organization and as a group of people. So that sort of translated very well. In terms of measuring all of that, I think we're still working on it, and we still are. One of the first goals in our new strategic plan is actually to continue to strengthen our workplace culture and to work with, our people, our staff, and our board members as individuals, and really focus on what they as individuals bring to the organization and help achieve our common goals.
Mm-hmm. And here's an instance of transparency. I have a little break now. It takes a break between projects, and the thing I've been thinking about most is the ability to assess culture and move culture in a limited period of time. I think it's the weakest part of my business model. And what I've observed is that if you make culture, you make culture changes around momentum, first of all. You don't do it by navel-gazing and talking. You've got to have the conversations about what kind of culture you want to work in. But if it turns too touchy-feely and too self-absorbed, it becomes a distraction from mission. So you chart a course and you make the changes around your momentum. I'm pretty sure of that. But what I'm also pretty sure of is If you don't keep that momentum and the dialogue going, the reversion to the old culture happens as a reflex. So if you hit a snag, like if my predecessors hit a snag that, beyond their control, like 2008 represented a snag, right? If you hit one shortly after the trajectory changes, the impulse is to go right back to all of the old cultural problems. And so figuring out, I'm really thinking right now about figuring out how to make that more durable, how to work with my successors better, and so on. So if anyone has any suggestions about that, you'll have my email address. I would love to hear from you. Terrific. Let me figure out where I was. Here we go. So help me get back. Build allies. Terrific. Okay. So Laura gave some great examples of their efforts to build allies. What I would suggest is that there are two things. The allies need to come from all directions. They need to come from your peers in the field. They need to be peers in the field. They need to be the people you serve. They need to be board members. You need to, kind of extend your reach as much as possible for the allies. And that it does two things. First of all, it broadens the sourcing of ideas. You just get more ideas from more quarters. You have to do it in managed, creative ways. You can't spend all of your time out on the road building allies, but opening up to what's going on and inviting ideas in is really important. The other thing, and I made this mistake a number of times early in doing this work. I've been doing this for 20 years now, and early on I focused so much internally that people would leave our offices for meetings and conferences and so on feeling good about, the fact that we're beginning to make the turn and we have some momentum, and they would go out to see people in the field who were sympathetic and concerned and worried and still complaining, and it was demoralizing. So to communicate as you go, here's what we're doing, we're making the change, and invite the broader community into the change process, it seems to me is much more constructive than trying to hold it closely in-house. Besides which, you can shape the message that way instead of letting it get shaped by itself. Next one is communicate continuously. This is one of my additions. Communicate continuously, 360-degree transparency. So you'll note from Laura's story that AAM communicated first with some research. I may not have been first, but they engaged in some research, so they were listening. That was the incoming side of communication. And then they went back to people and said, this is what you told us, so taking the communication out. And the idea of testing your new ideas with the skeptics, I think is a brilliant idea, to go to the people that are frenemies and say, hey, here's what we're thinking about them, and let them react first. If you don't make them complete converts, at least you get a dry run on what you have to respond to, right? At least they'll tell you, here are the objections that you're likely to hear. And then, of course, as Laura emphasized, you've got to sustain it over time. You have to keep communicating, and keep communicating, and keep communicating. The old assumptions die very hard, and the steady communication helps the organization's resilience when it does encounter the inevitable setback. So, I actually had an illustration there that just popped to mind. So. I had a client years ago that had a horrible problem of transparency and accuracy. It had actually had many years of misrepresenting declining membership numbers. It was inflating its membership numbers. Almost no one saw the full financial reports. Managers had trouble even getting their parts of the financial report accurately, undoctored and on time, and everyone had private records and databases. And the approach that we came up to was to declare that we were moving into an era of radical candor and radical transparency. And the truth of the matter is there wasn't anything very radical about what we were doing. We were doing what we should have been doing anyway. But the effect of it seemed to be to make a virtue of taking the risk. So we were scared that if, so-and-so knew X, which was in our numbers, that whether it was a member or a member of staff or a board member, he or she would flee, right? And so that caution caused us to kind of clamp down on the information. And by talking about radical transparency and radical candor, we made a virtue of our willingness to take the risk, and we can be proud of it instead of scared by it. The next one is the big issue is create momentum and insist upon results. Be persistent is one of the points that Laura made in this category. The one thing the one additional observation I would offer here is that there seems to be there's some kind of black magic in my experience in the 6 to 9 month time frame. And I didn't ask Laura whether they had this experience or not, but it seems to me that the new initiatives almost always hit snags in the 6 to 9 month range. So whether it's revealing your own mistakes that are just kind of showing up through the process of living through the new initiative, whether it's people wearing out and just being tired of the change initiative, something conflates to create setbacks in that 6 to 9 month time frame. And you better be prepared to muscle through it. Talk through it, of course, and keep the dialogue going, but also just be prepared to reassure people and hunker down and work through. Another one that this will fit, I think, thematically with a number of the other things I've seen, but language that my colleagues and I often use is about acting forcefully and experimentally. So in AAM's case, in Laura's study, by introducing a number of changes simultaneously, that's a pretty bold and pretty forceful thing to do. An alternative is to lay out publicly a timeline for when you're going to make certain changes and then hold yourself to that timeline. Be able to confess if you can't hit it, but do your darndest to hold to it. But you need to be able to create that sense of momentum to move forcefully. But there's nothing wrong in this modern era. I think the Internet has taught us this. There's nothing wrong with declaring it's an experiment. This is a pilot or this is a trial period, and we'll get back to you. If you give us your feedback, we'll get back to you about the changes we need to make. But engaging your public in the experiment and giving yourselves the room to be imperfect, which is inevitable, is a really important part of it. And it also gives you the permission to be forceful. You don't have to know you're absolutely right in order to go do it and go do it hard if you have the permission to step back and do it differently if the data comes in differently than you anticipated. And let's see. So the next one, proceed with integrity and insist upon it. We've talked about that with regard to communications, transparency, and so on. The other category in which that's important about proceeding with integrity is the kind of intellectual integrity involved in setting goals, declaring discoveries, acknowledging failures. But I actually, in response to, it occurred to me to say earlier, and then I failed to in response to something Laura said, the capital that leadership has most of in a change initiative is integrity. It's believability. It is that you're holding an honest dialogue, that you want to go where other people want to go, that you're willing to listen, that you'll tell them the truth. So acknowledging failures and challenges and being explicit about the goals, and also sharing the discoveries, the aha moments, which people then find kind of invites them to be a part of the dialogue about what you're learning. A really important part of framing the conversation. And finally, insist upon accountability. This actually connects with 2 or 3 of these themes, but one of the techniques that I have found really useful is when the first time something goes significantly wrong on my watch, I try to personally take 4 times as much responsibility for it as I think I'm actually guilty of, right? I really inflate my responsibility. And that's my theory here is that, like everybody else, I discount my own responsibility, right? So I probably got to double it just to get it back to where it should be. And then I want to double it again as a signal that it's all right to make mistakes, that it's all right to admit failures, that we're going to, because this is almost always, in a change episode, this is almost always a cultural issue. People are hunkered down, they're scared, and even if under more benign circumstances they could admit error or acknowledge problems, they can't under these circumstances. So sending that signal is a really powerful thing to do. Also create clear performance criteria. You can't rework performance or people's year-long criteria the day you get in, but what you can do is set these mini change initiatives in place and be very clear about the expectations in those, and then begin to roll that into the broader exercise of kind of talent management and expectations. So building the accountability in increments. And finally, and by far the toughest of them all, and the worst part of this work by an immense margin, is you almost certainly have to make some personnel changes. And when you do, it is very, very easy, particularly in a tumultuous situation, to let personal fairness. You're afraid people are going to leave, they're worn out, they're frustrated, and it's very easy to let internal fairness trump mission. But people aren't there to be recipients, first and foremost, to be recipients of internal fairness. It's a very important value. It's usually compatible with mission and with your values. But when you're faced with a choice between making the right decision for mission and making the right decision about who stays or goes, how many people you can have on payroll, whether you can hold that position, you have to make the decision in favor of mission. And if you work too long to keep somebody in place who's underperforming, you're engaged in another kind of internal fairness, unfairness, because somebody in the organization is picking up the slack, or maybe many people are suffering from the failure of performance. So making and that's another issue in which the drip torture is even worse than the blast of cold water. So making those decisions early and moving on from them is an incredibly painful and an incredibly important thing to do. So this is the way I tried to kind of form our key thoughts in this set of points, in this progression, and I failed to do it. But the slide you see, and if I just couldn't make it work, it seemed too forced, too strained. But the way I talk to colleagues about these episodes is we start with mission, we move to clarity, through integrity we get to accountability. And if we do that, we cycle back and enhance the mission. So with that, Jeff?
Okay, thank you, Pat. Thank you, Laura. Anyone have any questions for our speakers? Yeah, right here. Just wait for the mic if you could.
Okay. Okay.
Hi,
the question.
Sorry, we have dueling microphones.
I had a question related. Could you expand a little bit about accountability? Because a lot of times when you have a bigger picture, it seems a lot of things are interrelated, more so than, the way that's easy to structure. So can you expand what you mean by accountability?
Yeah. That's a great point, Diane. I think with matrix management and with our efforts to break down silos, what accountability is changes. It gets tougher to kind of get it pinned down. The best counsel I can provide in kind of a generic way is make sure that people have a clear, in the charity side of the world, people use the expression logic model. I'm not sure whether that's as often used in associations, but you have a clear way of thinking about how the pieces of what you're doing relate to where you're trying to go. So you start with, here's where we want to go, and here are the things we're going to have to do in order to get there. Here's who's responsible for those things. You break it down as finely as you can, and if you keep pushing on that, if you push that to really sharp clarity, you can get elements, benchmarks along the way that you can get, Jane and Sam and Sarah and Joe individually accountable for, as well as the team. And also, if you've got somebody who, I like to work in teams that are often cutting across departments, but if you're working in a team and somebody's holding the rest of the team back, that'll surface, right? That'll show up. So that's another form of kind of mutual accountability. And another thing that I think, now I won't profess to having gotten there, but the objective I hold for myself in creating the culture of accountability is to create an environment in which my colleagues can come to me and say, look, Pat, you're about to screw this up. All right. I mean, if I can create an environment in which somebody who's 3 rungs below me in the organization can tell me they think I'm really wrong about this, that's a powerful way of sending the signal of accountability. And I'm accountable as well, not just to the mission, but also to my colleagues. So that's, again, 360-degree sort of accountability. Anything to add to that?
Well, Pat and Laura, thank you so much. This has been really very interesting. And I was just wondering, Laura, you said something at the beginning of the presentation that when you showed your board sort of the data and the graphs, that they sort of got on board very quickly with some of your ideas. Would you just talk about how you've worked with your board in the subsequent years to make sure that they're strong and effective and that you've been bringing them along? I think maybe for some of us in our organizations, we have varying degrees of expertise within our board and differing ideas about the direction of our organizations. And I think sometimes change for boards is just as difficult as it is for individual staff members. Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would tell you that I think the board culture change has lagged behind the staff culture change, for all the reasons you just mentioned, and so it's sort of it is an ongoing process. 2 things. We have spent an unbelievable amount of time, and subsequent to the changes being made, sort of evaluating them with the board. And so it's not all, and I don't always follow this as much as I preach it, but telling them the bad along with the good has been really important too. I think both building sort of credibility, giving them a role in the, helping to figure out the next sort of wave of changes and the implementation. So we've spent good portions of each of our board meetings in the last 3 years since we launched the changes, showing the same kind of charts so that they can really be coming along with us and evaluating what's been happening. And some of them have been great charts, and some of them have been, well, we didn't quite think this was going to happen, and here's how we're addressing it. What do you think? How do you think we can address it, and what can you do? We also we have a board of 26, and they're vastly different in their roles and their capacity to help in the field, because they're mostly from the museum field. We try to treat them as individuals, so we pretty rarely give a charge to the whole board, and we deal with more, here are the people who we think can be out in the field talking to, local museums about some of the changes. Here are the people we think can be internal advisors to us in one, expertise area or another, and sort of trying to really figure out what's the specific strengths of each of our board members to help us, rather than giving a generic charge. And I found that to be really useful in engaging them as individuals.
Yeah. I might add just a quick footnote to that, and that is that I would also not claim great strength in boards, because everybody knows I'm only there in changing boards because I'm only there a limited period of time, and I've seen also the changes that I think have been made that revert shortly after the departure. So it's a big challenge. But where we have had some success, it is by being clear about the change in the role of the board to something more strategic, more iterative, and drawing them into that, building enthusiasm for that, rather than trying to be corrective, rather than trying to talk them out of old habits or teach them against old habits. So if you can paint a vision of where you want to go in terms of a board that really deals with big picture issues and engages with the constituents and brings information into the boardroom and so on, and then try to build enthusiasm around that, some of the bad behaviors kind of get jettisoned along the way.
And then reinforce that it was all their idea to begin with.
Yeah, of course, absolutely, with staff as well.
But Laura, that one follow-up question, and your last comment kind of goes to my point. In your case, the change was clearly driven by you and by staff. And in the change that Pat has orchestrated in so many nonprofits that he's kind of parachuted in to help rescue. The change has been orchestrated by him and kind of led by the staff. But of course, we also know that sometimes big change occurs in a nonprofit that's driven by the board. And we haven't really talked about that dynamic today, but for either of you, in terms of those board-driven changes that you've seen in the past, any kind of lessons to pull away from that, things that might be a little bit different from everything we've talked about here today, which was kind of more focused on staff-driven change?
Mm-hmm. My experience with I've been in several places where the board started the change but forced several changes before they forced the change in CEO. So they were kind of driving the ship already, and I had to figure out a way to kind of get behind the wheel, whatever the wheel of the ship is called. So the thing I have seen in those instances is the board, the nonprofit boards, association and charity alike, tend to be slow making that decision, and they tend to intrude into the management function before they actually make the decision. So they're already kind of stepping over the governance management threshold. The staff often sees that as a causal phenomenon, and sometimes it is, but sometimes it's a response to the problems, and the board just, it's a convenient incremental way of trying to intrude. So one of the things you have to do is be really attentive up front to where the boundaries are, and then be prepared to have the difficult conversations with your bosses about, we agreed that the boundaries were here and that feels like it's crossing the boundary. By the way, I'm also a radical about not creating communications barriers between staff and board. So I'm really, really loose about that. I want a lot of communication flowing in a lot of directions, but when that happens, you need to be really clear as to who gets to make the decision. So framing a decision, I often have decisions with board members in which I'll say things like, standard is rehearsed, right? I'll say, I know I have to make a decision about this, and I realize it's a management decision. I'm responsible for whether it works or not, but I'd really be curious what you think about it. So I sent the signal as to who's responsible in the end, but I've also said you know a lot, and I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Yep. I have a question. What do you do when the change management team or your supporters are outnumbered by the naysayers, and you can't make personnel changes because the naysayers outnumber the supporters, or as well as the naysayers may be in front of executive level management nodding their heads yes, but in operations and delivering on those change, they're nodding no and not doing it, and they're being blocked for you. So how do you kind of handle those two situations?
Laura, you want to respond first? No? Okay. So the first question is about when the majority of the staff is naysayers, and you're saying, are you describing that position, are you describing that issue for someone who is or is not the CEO?
So let's say the CEO is a supporter, right? They want to make this change. And you have the executive level members who want to support the change. But then you have different departments who don't want to do it. Well, on face value, they're saying, we'll do, but then in action they're saying no, and they become almost like double agents to supporting you. And I see this a lot. I've seen it several times where there's this change management, CEO down to the executive level, but then the real workers, the foot soldiers, so to speak, of doing the work, are saying no, and they outnumber the executive level, and you can't make personnel changes to everyone. So you kind of have this conundrum where you're like, yay, change, but everyone's like, yeah, sure, yeah.
And they're not sabotaging.
Yeah, they're not doing anything.
Yeah. So that's a different, I think the answer to that question, or my best effort at answering that, would be different depending upon how far into the change process you are. And it's easier to answer if you've already begun to make some changes and this stuff starts showing up. Because at that point, you can start, you need to be able to illustrate But the problem is you can't take it upon office gossip that so-and-so is dragging his or her feet, right? So you create an initiative in which that person can succeed or fail that contributes to the other things, or is part of a small team that will succeed or fail. And you let the person shine a light on him or herself as either willing to cooperate or not. Now, at the front end, when you've got to make some decisions and moves really, really quickly, you basically, if you suspect that people are like that, you basically have to marginalize them. You basically have to keep them from being in a position. Your initiatives, the initiatives you choose, are positioned such that they can't screw it up for you, because you can't take the time to, create this circumstance in which they fail if they do, and then you can make a change, and then you get somebody in there who can make the thing happen. So it's basically live with it on the front end and then shine a light on it as you get farther into the initiative. Does that help? Not terrifically, I can tell.
But I'm talking operationally. So let's say it's project management wants to initiate change, but the account executive doesn't want to make those changes. And so they're managing the relationship with the client. So they have a lot of power and a lot of control what happens. But they don't want these new operational changes. And it's difficult. So what do you do? And you can profess it, and you can have the higher-ups tell them, but it's still going on. And you can't lay off that person and make a change because they're directly related to the client, and you don't want to change that up quite yet. And so you leave this, you kind of have a black hole, and if you don't do anything, usually you lose business. So when we didn't initiate the change and people blocked it, we lost business.
I think going back to one of Pat's points about, remember, it's all about people. Having analyzing and really figuring out through asking lots of questions why folks are reticent to change, and it's almost always fear. It's fear of failing, it's fear of more work because it's change, it's fear of not knowing if the change is going to work. It's just fear. And so I think once you know kind of the root cause of the reticence, you can help to sort of create an environment where all of those things are acceptable, where it's, we're in this together, and it's, leading on some things that might be easier first, low-hanging fruit that can kind of step you into changes to take it more slowly if you have the luxury of doing that. And then I couldn't agree more with the tactic at some point to marginalize, whether it's, you start to create this perception that the change is happening whether you individual or group are coming aboard or not, and you start over-amplifying, I think, to some extent the supporters in order to marginalize the deniers, and eventually they either need to be coached out of the organization or they self-opt out because they just don't want to go along with new things, and either way is fine.
Yeah. And people almost always, just a quick footnote again, Jeff, that people almost always exaggerate the peril of losing an individual member of staff, right? That, this funder will leave, or this member will leave, or whatever if so-and-so goes. And usually, not always, but usually there's more tackiness, there's more adhesion in the relationship than you imagine from the inside.
Okay, great point. Question over here.
So throughout these various processes, and either of you can answer this question, what's been the role of engaging major funders, donors in this? I know I talk about allies, but sometimes nonprofits, any association is going to be a little bit reticent to sort of lift up the hood to a funder, or sometimes maybe even a funder. Maybe a funder's driving sometimes the change here. We're going to make you do this because we're investors. So what's been the role of engaging your supporters, especially major supporters?
Some of you will know or many of you probably know of a guy named Paul Light who writes on nonprofit issues a lot. He was at Brookings for a while. He's frequently interviewed by National Public Radio on nonprofit issues. And I don't really know the guy well, but we went out one time and had coffee. And over coffee, we were talking about this kind of issue and the funder, kind of recipient relationship. And he said, by the way, he had been at a foundation just prior. And he said, the relationship between grantor and grantee is the single most dishonest relationship I've ever seen, and I've been a faculty member at 4 major universities. So my experience is that a big part of that reluctance is self-inflicted. And there are lots of problems in the dynamic between grantor and grantee. I've lived through a bunch of them. But I have too many times had to go to grantors or major funders or big members and say, we've got deep problems, and you saw something here you wanted to invest in, and we're going to get you to that, but we need for you to stick with us through the problems. And I've never had anybody leave, and I've had some people voluntarily double down. Let's see if we can't find a way to get you some more resources to help you get through it. So again, I think you just have to go look at, and the other thing is that there is something, if it's not dishonest, there's a violation to the trust if they hear from somebody else what's going on, right? If they get it through back channels, then you've really hurt yourself. So thank you for the question, Marshall. That's a great one, and one many organizations grapple with.
Okay, well, we are at 2 o'clock Eastern, time to wrap up. I want to thank Pat and Laura for a terrific program today. Thanks to all of you for coming and dialing in online. We hope to see you back here next month for next month's program. Have a good rest of your day.
See you all. Terrific, thanks. Well, I missed to turn off the recording.